Power Station at Berkeley, NYC presents Tales from the Tape Vault with Roy Hendrickson.
Hi there. My name is Roy Hendrickson, and today we're going to speak with a longtime friend of mine, Jerry Barnes, an incredible musician and producer. We've done many records together over the years, and we've had lots of fun. Hey, Jerry, how you doing?
Hey, Roy, you're still ugly, man. It's good to see you online, man.
Good to see you too, man. Let's talk about how you got started as a child, right?
To do a chronological history of our process, the easiest way I can get to it is Catrice started playing piano on her own at about 10 years old and was so good that my mother got her a teacher. And we were living in Texas at the time. My dad is a retired Army sergeant, so we're Army brats. And he always managed bands. And the instruments were always there, but I can say from my perspective, I didn't really pay attention to that. Music was always around, but I didn't really play anything. I didn't really practice anything. When Catrice started playing piano, even at that point, I was an artist, as you can see on the back of the wall here.
Sure.
These are some of my paintings. And I was selling my portraits from 9 years old to when I started playing bass. My cousin was touring with Earth, Wind & Fire, who was the biggest R&B band, well, the biggest pop band, actually, at that time. The categories weren't so divided back then. They came through North Carolina, which is where my mom and dad retired. He came by to visit, and my sister was already playing piano. And they spent the whole time talking about music and jamming, and I just felt left out. And I was like, I'm gonna be able to play something next time this dude comes by. So my father had a Echo bass that's from Italy, I think. I put a string on it. Might have had 2 strings. And I started practicing. I was probably 15 when I started learning how to play bass. I think I told you last time that my first bass line was Steve Martin's King Tut, because we had a talent show I went to the Governor's School in North Carolina for art. I must have borrowed somebody's bass to do the talent show. At that point, I was just practicing every day and playing, and I didn't have a teacher. I taught myself from looking at pictures. I bought a Mel Bay beginner's bass book, and I just looked at the pictures. I would just try to copy the fingering of the picture to the bass that I had and try to emulate it as close as possible. We didn't have YouTube at the time.
That's right.
We're out here in the country in North Carolina, and we had the time to practice without distraction. But deeper than that, if you had a dream or a vision to do something, you looked at a picture and tried to emulate. You didn't have a physical movement of a fingering. You just had to figure it out.
Yeah, so you taught yourself bass, and then you got deeper into it, right?
Well, my cousin, he was touring with Earth, Wind & Fire again, and he came through North Carolina, and the second time he came, I was able to play with him and Catrice. And from there, my father saw that we were both practicing and really into playing pop music, for example. And my father put us together with a bunch of musicians here in the area, and we started a band called the Third Generation.
That's cool.
We played locally. We played clubs. We played tobacco barns. We played any venue that would have us, usually for free. Around the same time, my father was able to get us opening act positions at national shows. So we were opening for bands like Cameo, Evelyn Champagne King, a group named Mother's Finest, probably the top R&B groups at the time. When they came through North Carolina, we were able to be the opening act.
So your dad figured out how to kind of get you into that scene.
Yeah, I mean, it was a really difficult time because I'm sure he didn't get paid anything to get the slot. But it gave us exposure. It gave us experience. We submitted our demos to record companies and producers. And that's where we met Diodato, who, from what I heard in the story, was that our band, which was called Third Generation, was on one side of the cassette.
Right.
And the other band was Pockets, looking for another record contract because they were with Columbia, Earth, Wind & Fire.
Right.
And Diodato played our side of the cassette and said, I want to sign these guys.
That's wild. So he heard something right away.
Yep. And the dudes that wrote the Pocket site scrambled to get us signed to Diodato. So my father had to get a lawyer. We ended up signing to Diodato's production company. Our first contract was with Clive Davis, Arista Records, 1980.
So cool.
And we did our first album with Clive. And we were in the studio in New Jersey called House of Music, next door to Meatloaf.
Sure, I was at this studio, yeah.
Aura and T.S. Monk. Kool and the Gang was also there recording one of their albums. So that was an exciting time. And then we would go back to North Carolina after we recorded. And then Diodato got us a deal at Epic, a distribution deal.
Okay.
Catrice wrote a song called Sugar Free, which became our biggest record.
Sure. A big hit.
Clive signed us and created the name Juicy. Well, the producers created Juicy at the time.
Right.
And then we kept the name Juicy.
Juicy. And
became a brother and sister act. I used to joke and say we were the Black Donnie and Marie.
So did you guys go right in and when you got signed, did you go right in and start making a record? Were you playing out a lot together?
The first album, we didn't write that much. We had songwriters and producers and co-producers. Okay. The second album, but between the first album and the second album, at that point, we were writing and recording. We probably wrote hundreds of songs during that time. When we got the record contract with Epic, she had Sugar Free already written. Most of our albums we would write here in North Carolina, transfer them to cassette, then redo them on 24 track with, professional gear and, separation and all that stuff.
You'd go back to New York and do that version.
Yeah, the second time we went to New York with Diodato is when we recorded a bunch of records. We worked with Harry Belafonte.
Wow.
We wrote the soundtrack for a movie he produced called Beat Street. Mm-hmm. So Catrice and I wrote the lyrics to that song called Beat Street Strut. We worked with Shirley MacLaine and Chuck Mangione. Gwen Guthrie, Roberta Flack. I'm just trying to think of all the artists that came through Diodato's. We were his musicians and his production team, and I would program the drums, and Catrice and I would do all the tracks pretty much by ourselves.
Sure.
There was a studio next door to Diodato studio called Gramavision Studios. Mm-hmm. And there I met Lenny White, Omar Hakim, Marcus Miller, and Bernard Wright recording.
Amazing.
That blew my mind because I had heard of them. The music was so funky that I was just like, oh my God, can we just throw away the drum machines and start cutting like these guys,
Right.
That's what I wanted to do at that time. Yeah, that was a great experience. And actually during that second record, we met so many musicians and artists in New York, and you would remember that in the 80s.
Sure.
It was just a revolving door.
It was just everywhere you went.
Talent. And all the studios were rolling like 24 hours. Mm-hmm. So that was the Sugar Free album, which became our hit single. And then we were contracted to do another album with Epic. We did a third album as Juicy, and that album featured Bernard Wright, Shaka Khan, Mark Stevens, Shaka's brother, Lenny White did some programming. I mean, it was like really cool. Everybody was like coming in and jamming with us at that point. You probably realize this, but there's a lot of celebrity cameos during that time of people sessions and singing a background part or being a part of the hand clap session or whatever.
Yes, some of it was on purpose and some of it was just because they were there. Right?
Yeah, and you had to get permission from the other label to have the artist's name on it, or you had to keep it anonymous. And so that was before we got to New York, and we moved to New York around '88. Roberta Flack was instrumental in bringing us to New York. She had a tour. She wanted a new band, and that's where we moved to New York. Had all the session guys, and started working with Arif Mardin.
I'm jealous. That must have been quite a trip for you.
There are definitely some moments in my life where I can say I was on a high. My first session with the Reef was Roberta Flack recording one of my songs. The session was me and Anthony Jackson playing bass together.
Wow, that's incredible.
With Greg Fillinganes on piano, and we cut a song that I wrote. I remember going home, I couldn't sleep, and I was just thinking, this is for two bass players to play together. This doesn't really happen that much unless it's a fusion jazz record or some kind of experimental record. It's just not a traditional sound, but I played the chords and Anthony played the bottom like an art. You know how he does the volume pedal swells and all his.
Yeah. He's amazing.
It was crazy. So that was one of my first sessions in New York City as a session musician. In regards to Roberta, we ended up producing her last album on Atlantic with Ahmet Erdogan was around, and Roberta was amazing. Like, she was knocking down her vocals with one takes. Then at that same time, we produced a single for Chaka Khan. And we started producing and writing for a lot of artists. Tony Terry. There was an act on Warner Brothers, 3D and Ex-Girlfriend. I don't know if these records even were on the charts or anything. It was a lot of work at one time, like in that little central 90s era. And this is before Catrice started touring with Sting, and I started touring with Chic at that time.
It must have felt great to be doing that gig.
Surreal in every way. I mean, probably every bass player learns good times, and to play with Niall and hear the original guy play his parts next to you is incredible, as a musician.
Sure. When I met you and Sherrod in DC doing the Go-Go record with the producer Sushi,
Oh, yeah.
You remember that time?
Yeah.
So Juju House was making his own solo record. We were doing basic tracks. Halfway through the songs, out went one rhythm section. Of course, Juju stayed because he was playing drums. He was the drummer. You guys show up and sit down and play the next song. And right away, I look up, I'm like, who are these guys? These guys are amazing. It was like the difference was like shocking to me. I'm like, you know what I mean? It was just like, you push record and all of a sudden it sounded like music, and it really caught my attention. I remember going outside talking to you three, right? So you came with Sherrod and a keyboard player, what was her name?
Oh, Chic's piano player, Cherie.
Monsters. And I have to say, I remember going out in the live room after like the first take or to adjust something, or maybe between songs, and saying, where do you guys live? And you said New York City. I was like, how come I don't know you guys? It was that big of an impact on me. The feel, the music, and everybody sounded so great. It was just mind-blowing.
What year was that?
It was 2001, I think. So we were at Q recording in Maryland, just outside of DC.
Yeah, I think we took a train.
And that's funny. When you guys walked in, I assumed you were from the go-go scene and just walked in that you lived nearby. Anyway, I hope to see Juju again. He was great.
Yeah, he was, we were together at Roberta Flack's band for years. An incredible drummer. I don't know if you ever went to a go-go in DC. To hear him play that with the band, with Chuck Brown, was historic.
I'm sure. Well, Jerry, man, I appreciate you spending some time with me today and sharing a bit about your history. And obviously, we have a lot of history together, and I hope to see you soon.
I hope it's soon, and I hope we can do what we did.
Pretty soon, we'll be right back at Power Station making records again.
That is our goal.